Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking Tunes with Dr. Tony, episode 6. I'm very enthusiastic about this episode. It's going to be the first time that I cover what I'm calling the trifecta of different groups or artists. However, I am a little bit saddened at the beginning of this video to talk about David Crosby and his recent passing. As is often the case, there are frequently a group of people who die together. So if we look at what's happened in the last 40 days, we've had 3 classic rock people pass on, starting with Kim Simmons, the founder and lead guitar player from Savoy Brown. And then we have Jeff Beck, who I talked about last Saturday. And then most recently, David Crosby. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, I know a lot of people are saddened by these deaths, but as classic rock fans, we need to face the inevitable, which is that many of these artists that we love from the 60s and 70s, they are now in their 70s and 80s, and their time here on Earth is not that long. It's just an occupational hazard, I guess, of being a human being. So we should not be too surprised when we get these announcements, and as we go through time, the frequency of some of our favorite artists passing away is going to increase. But the good news is that so many of them are preserved as a permanent record in their vinyl records, in their CDs, and also photos that we have of them from the past, and also our memories, or another permanent record. Maybe we saw them in concert during their prime, or we have records that we love from the 60s, 70s, and maybe even the 80s. So our memories are also a permanent record. And in a way, we could look at a couple songs that describe how I feel about this. The first one is by Joe Jackson, 19 Forever. So maybe in terms of our music appreciation, we are going to be 19 forever, where we are forever young in our minds, even though our bodies are starting to deteriorate. And also is a song by the Kinks, Celluloid Heroes, which you may know as Everybody's in Showbiz. And it's basically about the film stars that live on. So in a way, that these people will never die. We'll keep them in our memories. So let's talk a little bit specifically about David Crosby. So he grew up in Southern California, and his dad was an Academy Award-winning cinematographer from 1931. So that's when talking movies were still in their infancy. And the movie that he won an Academy Award for was called Taboo, a story of the South Seas. David struggled during his formal education in middle school and high school, and had a lot of disciplinary issues. But his music career got off the ground in 1962 when he joined Les Baxter's Balladeers. I don't know if you've even heard of that group, but they were a folk group, and their primary distinction, it may be that they were the first act to appear at the Golden Bear, a concert venue in Huntington Beach, where I saw a number of concerts, including Larry Coryell, and also the Greg Kihn Band. So David Crosby joined the Byrds in 1964, and he was primarily a harmony singer. In reality, he was a peripheral contributor. He was on their first 5 albums and rarely had a chance to sing lead vocals. One of the songs that he did write and sing that's fairly memorable is Everybody's Been Burned. But I did a quick review of their songwriting credits, and he co-wrote less than 15% of the Byrds' songs on those first 5 albums. So I think his lack of respect, I guess, in the band drove him to leave, and along with Stephen Stills, who left Buffalo Springfield, and Graham Nash, who left the Hollies for similar reasons, David helped form Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which later became Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young when Neil Young joined them on their second album. So compared to the Byrds, CSN and CSNY, it was a more democratic affair. And as a result, David got to sing many lead vocals. On the first album, he sang Long Time Comin' and also Guinevere. And then in the second album, he sang Deja Vu, which was one of my favorite songs by him, and also Almost Cut My Hair. So along with his career, he recorded 4 albums with Graham Nash, and 3 of them were gold albums, reaching number 4, number 6, and number 26 on the Billboard charts. He also recorded 8 studio albums, solo albums. And the last one he did in 2021. But the first one was If I Could Only Remember My Name, which was released in 1971. This is the only solo album that he had that went gold, and it was number 12 on the Billboard 200. And my opinion is that this album did so well commercially because he was capitalizing on Crosby, Stills and Nash and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's reputation. Now, David is probably best remembered as a harmony singer, but he did have a fairly distinctive voice. And interestingly, of the different singers from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, his voice held up the best. And I think this is because he didn't really strain that much when he sang. And during the time that he was incarcerated and also sidelined, he didn't do much singing. So his voice was in pretty good shape all the way to the end of his life. Now, one of the facts that I wanted to share with you that you may not know about is that David Crosby was largely responsible for introducing Joni Mitchell to the rest of the world. So as you may know, David was an avid sailor, and he was in Florida, and he went to a coffee house and he saw Joni Mitchell playing there. And as a result, he was so impressed, he brought her to Laurel Canyon. And I think they had a brief romantic fling, as Joni did with many people during those years. But to the best of my memory, when I read David Crosby's autobiography about this, Joni was in the bedroom, and I think it may have been at Mama Cass Elliott's home, and Crosby and Nash and Young, Crosby, Nash and Stills were there, and Joni came out of the bedroom, and she started singing, and this basically was the beginning of really impressing people with her career. Another thing I wanted to mention, I saw David Crosby in concert twice. I did see him with Crosby, Stills, and Nash with the band without Robbie Robertson opening for them at the Greek Theater. And then I saw David Crosby as a solo act in the late 90s at the Coach House in San Juan Capistrano. And it was at this time that his biological son that he never knew, James Raymond, appeared and played with David at that concert along with Jeff Pevar on guitar. And as a result, they formed a band that made 2 albums, and it was called CPR, basically a takeoff on CSN, which were the initials of the 3 people in the band. So, as I mentioned, this show is my first trifecta, and I think these 3 people dying in succession is a form of a trifecta we don't want to realize. But just to make sure we have the same understanding, a trifecta is an achievement of 3 successive outcomes or successes. And it comes from horse racing, where if you're a betting person, I've never been to a horse race, I hope to go one day. If you bet on the first 3 finishers and they all come in the order that you predicted, that's a win, place, and show. And that's a form of a trifecta. So anyway, the last video that I recorded at the end, I mentioned I'd be doing this. And when I thought about the group to do, the group that I selected came to mind immediately. But I wanted to share some of the rules for this trifecta program, and I'm going to hopefully follow these rules in the future. So the 3 albums in succession have to be preceded and followed by albums that are clearly not as good in terms of being as highly rated or commercial successes. So this excludes the Beatles, for example, who had 5 albums in a row that were all amazing, starting with Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's. Then we had the White Album and Abbey Road. Those would be 5, and I think there may have been Magical Mystery Tour in there or Let It Be, but those were kind of one-off type of albums. So I'm going to try to stay true to this formula as we go forward. And so without any further delay, the albums that came to mind were my favorite prog rock band, Yes, and it's their 3rd, 4th, and 5th studio albums, which were preceded by their first album just called Yes, and the second one called Time and a Word. Neither one of these albums charted on the Billboard 200, and then their 5th album was followed by Tales from Topographic Ocean. Now, even though this album reached number 1 in the UK and number 6 on the Billboard chart, signifying there was commercial success, it is a polarizing album with fans and critics. But the Yes album, their 3rd album, Fragile, their 4th, and Close to the Edge are all critical and commercial successes. In fact, Close to the Edge is cited by many as the best prog rock album ever. But I don't agree. In fact, I don't think it's Yes's best album. Now, before we talk about these albums, I saw Yes a number of times. The first time was in 1971 in November at the Forum in Inglewood, California. And Yes was the opening act for the Jay Giles Band, and then 10 years after, which was a real interesting pairing. I was sitting behind the stage, and I didn't know anything about Yes. I was just there to see 10 years after. And I thought that Rick Wakeman and John Anderson were both female because I could never see their face. And John Anderson's voice was so high. Of course, later on, I did realize that they were male. So that's kind of a funny story. But after that, I saw them at the Pond in Anaheim with the main group, but Alan White was on drums instead of Bill Bruford. I saw them here in Georgia when they had the lead singer from the tribute band. I think his name is John Davison, replacing John Anderson. Then I saw them the last time at the Atlanta Symphony Hall, where they did Close to the Edge and Going for the One in their entirety. And this is the last time that I think Chris Squire got to perform before he passed away. And they also had John Davison on vocals. It was not a good show, but Steve Howe still had amazing chops, and enjoyed seeing him. So let's go ahead and talk about these albums. So the Yes album was my introduction to Yes. 1971, it's the year I graduated from high school. And the most noteworthy event on this album was replacing Peter Banks on guitar with Steve Howe. It also marked the maturity of the band as songwriters. All the songs are originals, unlike the tunes on their first 2 albums. And there's not a bad song on the album. I've Seen All Good People, maybe the most well-known and accessible song from this album. But it opens up with Yours Is No Disgrace, which is amazing. And then we have Starship Trooper and Perpetual Change, which are both epics that Yes played in concert for many, many years to come. So as I mentioned, Steve Howe joined the band, and his presence is a tremendous improvement over Peter Banks. As a matter of fact, he's one of my favorite guitarists, Steve Howe, of all time. Now, the keyboards are not strong on this album. Tony Kaye was reluctant to embrace mellotron and also synthesizer. He just wanted to stick with playing organ and piano. So he was kind of on thin ice there on that album. And Steve Howe's guitar playing definitely overwhelms what Tony Kaye contributes to that album. So after this album, Tony Kaye left and was replaced by Rick Wakeman. And now you have the classic Yes lineup, which lasted for just 2 albums. You had Chris Squire on bass, Steve Howe guitar, Bill Bruford on drums, John Anderson lead vocals, and Rick Wakeman on the keyboards. And their album, their 4th studio album was Fragile, also released in 1971. Now, there has been criticism targeted at this album because of the song sequencing, but I think it's perfect, and I'll tell you why. So side 1 and side 2 on the vinyl open with amazing, catchy songs that I never grow tired of. And on side 1 we have Roundabout, and side 2 we have Long Distance Runaround. Now, Long Distance Runaround has an amazing bass part in the beginning. Chris Squire, along with John Entwistle, are my 2 favorite rock bassists in terms of just being virtuoso. Now, technically speaking, on side 2, Long Distance Runaround is actually preceded by a 35-second mad song composed by Bill Bruford called 5% of Nothing. And the thing about the critics, they don't like the fact that each member were given short songs to compose. But I think that these short songs buttress the 4 major compositions on the album, which are Roundabout, Long Distance Runaround, and then the last 2 songs on side A, 1 and 2, South Side of the Sky and Heart of the Sunrise. So we have Rick Wakeman playing Cons and Brahms, which is after Roundabout. Then John Anderson has a short song, We Have Heaven. Chris Squire does The Fish. And then we have Steve Howe doing Mood for a Day. So Heart of the Sunrise is my favorite Yes song of all time. But before I talk about that, South Side of the Sky has some very cool sound effects throughout. And with Heart of the Sunrise, it pretty much opens up almost like an exercise with the bass and the drums and the guitar all playing in unison. And then what happens is the guitar kind of fades out and then comes in, and then we have John Anderson's vocals. So I think it's a perfect song in so many ways. All right, so in 1972, Yes released Close to the Edge. And I may like Fragile better because I heard it first, and it was such an improvement over the Yes album. My issue with Close to the Edge compared to Fragile is the length of the title song. I think they could have made it shorter, and that would have freed up time to maybe do another song. But the length of that song is what people love about the album, so I guess I may be the odd person out. Side 2, it opens up with And You and I, and that's a great song. And then the album closes with Siberian Katru, and that is my second favorite Yes song. So I would rate Fragile and Close to the Edge as both 10 out of 10. And I would rate the Yes album as 9 out of 10 because of the weaker keyboards and the production. But the songwriting on the Yes album is great. Now, I wanted to mention that after Peter Banks left Yes and then Tony Kaye, they went on to play together on a band called Flash, which to me sounded like a Yes knockout or knockoff group. They had a hit single called Small Beginnings, and then I believe that both of them played on an album or a group called Badger. So if you haven't heard Flash or Badger and you want to hear more Yes music, those are good alternatives. There's also another band called Starcastle that maybe you've never heard of. Their music is very reminiscent of Yes, and I think they're a Canadian band. So that brings us to the end of our conclusion of the first trifecta. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I hope that you do so. Also, if you like this episode, please do that. And I really encourage you to give some comments, because I have not been getting too many comments. And I know a lot of you just want to watch the video and not subscribe and like or provide comments. And that's fine, but it's really good for me to get the feedback, to know what you think, and to hear what you have to offer. So anyway, I hope everybody has a blessed day, and I will talk to you next time. Until then, bye-bye.